Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimberly John, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of PAVRO to today's webinar called Leading in a Time of Crisis. If you could just let me know in the chat box if you can hear me clearly, that would be helpful. And then Alex, if you can let me know if there's any issues. If not, I'll keep going. So welcome to today's webinar. When the webinar committee first met in January, we had a whole host of ideas and topics that we wanted to cover, that we wanted to offer our membership. And we had no idea of what the impact that COVID-19 would have on our respective organizations and basically our world at large. We're living in a very interesting time right now. And we just hope that all of your teams and your families all remain safe. And we just ask that you seek out opportunities to support our colleagues who work in the healthcare and other essential services. Many of them have been working long hours as they support the nation's efforts to flatten the curve, which is definitely an unprecedented task. And so we just collectively, if we can just send our support to them, that would be great. In addition to supporting each other, we're also challenged with determining the best ways to support our volunteers. In response to these challenges, our president, Alex Vasic, worked with the webinar committee to bring you today's session, which is intended to give you some perspective on how to contextualize the pandemic, the current pandemic, and ways to offer strategies that you can effectively manage and lead your volunteers in the days and the weeks and the months that are ahead of us. And so I thank you all for taking some time out to pause and to attend today so that we can all collectively give some thought to this area. To this end, we have invited today's speaker, Steve Armstrong, to share his experience and insight. And Steve Armstrong has lived and worked across Canada and around the world as an infantry sergeant major in the Canadian Army. He has also been a municipal administrator and a Red Cross executive and disaster manager. Steve led a team of hundreds of volunteers and staff who responded to the SARS crisis in 2003. And within today's session, you will hear the similarities and differences Steve has observed in Canada's response efforts. Today, Steve works as a professional speaker, an educator, and a leadership consultant. And in addition to his impressive professional resume, Steve is also a family man. He has 3 stepsons, 2 daughters-in-law, a grandson, a great dog, and a very patient and understanding wife named Deborah. Steve joins us today from his home in Calgary. And as a reminder, as questions come up during today's session, feel free to add your questions to the chat box. But I will hand it over to Steve. And let me, all right.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly.
So welcome. Oh, you're welcome.
So I just switched over. So good morning, everybody. As that gracious introduction are some of my best lies, and my mom believes every word of it. We're going to go through about a 30-minute conversation here this morning, and then hopefully leave lots of space for you to ask questions. And as you come up with something along the way, if you just care to type it into the question box on the control panel on the side of your screen, we'll move on. I won't go over any more of the introduction than Kimberly shared with you, but most of my work, certainly with Red Cross, and quite frankly, a lot with the military, was with volunteers, especially reservists in the military are all volunteers. They do get paid, but they have to agree to show up and do their work. And all of the list of disasters and responses I've worked on that you see on the list on the slide in front of you, quite frankly, those could not have been successful without volunteers. And so I'm going to touch on mostly on the SARS response, but a lot of the things that I'll speak to around managing, leading, and engaging volunteers are lessons I learned from these experiences. And quite frankly, I think if you can engage a volunteer to put their lives and their family on hold and respond to something as scary as SARS or whatever, I think you can probably get them to volunteer and help you out in whatever your organization needs. So with every PowerPoint and every webinar, we need to have a mandatory inspirational quote. And these are two of my favorites. If plan A doesn't work, stay cool. There's still 25 more letters in the alphabet. And the other one is more from the military, but quite frankly, it applies here, is like, no plan, no matter how wonderful and how thoughtful and how great it is, will survive first contact with the enemy. And in this circumstance with COVID and how we as leaders respond, our job is to make up a plan, but that plan cannot be etched in stone. These plans need to be pliable, malleable, and workable. And our job as a leader is actually to monitor what's happening around us and adjust the plan to the circumstance. I know that most of you are in Ontario, so this may be more fresh or more front of mind than maybe other parts of the world, and certainly other parts in Canada. But in March, actually it was March, so it was in 2003, so 17 years ago, almost to the same time, is when SARS landed in Scarborough, in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. An interesting story, it too came out of China. Doctors were working with people, SARS affected people in China, and the doctors took some time and were in Hong Kong, and one of the doctors was in an elevator and sneezed, an innocent and seemingly unremarkable event, and sneezed, and a woman in the elevator picked up SARS from that sneeze, was on her way to the airport, got on a plane, flew to Toronto, and there we were. And in some regard, it was quite similar in that this disease started happening. It was like this minor little thing, a weird little thing, and it started getting away from us. And I often say at the time, like looking back at that time, much like today, like we weren't even sure if the apes were going to rule the planet come the end of the SARS event. Was this the big one? And for lots of reasons, it wasn't, but there was no small amount of fear and concern in Ontario and some parts of the world as the SARS thing started taking off. At the time, I led the disaster management team in Ontario for the Canadian Red Cross, and we had a great team. We were really getting it up and running and really changing our model from a staff-driven exercise to a volunteer-driven exercise where the volunteers were leaders and workers, and the professional volunteers were then supported by the full-time professional staff, as opposed to the staff leading from the front. So we were in a bit of an organizational change at the time. As it started taking off, SARS, that is, we volunteered, we were engaged in some places and volunteered through partnerships with various municipalities and other partner organizations to do whatever was required. And that was everything from logistics support. We engaged in providing food and sort of, I'll call them food bank kits, but boxes of food that we could deliver to people who were self-quarantined. And we also provided home delivery of what they called SARS kits from the public health officers. And these kits contain thermometers, gloves, masks, information packets. And we actually had volunteers engaged going right up to people's door and delivering stuff. And the reason I think this is an important point is these people, first off, like most of you working in the not-for-profit, you're not there because the pensions are the best in the world and the pay is the highest in the world, but you're there because you believe and you care. And the volunteers you work with are there because they believe and they care. But you're not going to get yourself killed over this. So we had to provide a high level of comfort to both our staff, for that matter, and the volunteers that would allow them to make an informed consent that this is work they wanted to do. So we'll talk about some of the details about how I think you can do that as we go forward. But we built a system with the best technical and professional support we could. So we engaged the Canadian College of Physicians and Surgeons to give us medical advice of how this could work. We engaged our volunteers at the time. This was completely modern to us, but it was like MapQuest was an early version of like Google Maps, which is a software package. And we had volunteers that were designing delivery routes to be able to deliver these kits. We had volunteers that were supporting municipalities and how they ran their emergency operations centers in a way that even the support staff within the municipalities couldn't hardly believe that this was coming from unpaid, but highly professional, highly engaged and brilliant people who were true volunteers in the fact that they agreed to deliver work and they were doing it gratis for no pay. So, and in that time, my memory is somewhat a little hazy, but we engaged somewhere close to 1,000 volunteers over a 1-month period. And from across Southern Ontario and a little bit up towards Sudbury, North Bay area, but principally in the GTA from sort of Oshawa area through to Kitchener-Waterloo and north to Barrie. And we actually had to trust these people because there was quite a distance between individuals, Red Cross personnel, volunteer and staff. And we had to believe that they were doing the right thing. And in those days, you know, the internet was there and alive, and email was there and alive, but it certainly wasn't as it stands today. So we had to both trust the volunteers that they were going to do what we needed them to do, and provide them the ability that they could trust us that we weren't going to put them in harm's way. So let's explore this a little bit. The first thing I think we all need to understand as leaders of nonprofit organizations, and particularly volunteer organizations, is we work really hard to build an organization that has a reputation for delivering results and value to our partners and stakeholders, and that we have trust within our team. So at every step of the way, especially with COVID, something that's scary, unnerving, and new, do not waste this asset. And if you don't have it now, starting to build it now is the wrong time, but we can start just the same. You should have a cachet of trust in your organization so people can trust what you're saying and what you're doing. Number one rule about being a leader is to be exceedingly human, over the top, especially when you're doing everything remotely and virtually and online. It's hard to be exceedingly human when you're all in one place and you can actually see somebody's eyes, you can touch them, you can take them to shake their hand or put a hand on a shoulder as required and appropriate. But it's really hard and doubly hard when it's all in ether and online. So by being exceedingly human, we need to build this trust. And if you're not there already, then you need to start. And by doing that, you need to be able to provide thoughtful and correct and proper and regularly updated information. We need to be humble as leaders. And when I say that, I'm not saying, you know, like groveling and playing yourself down, but you need to be humble in the fact that you don't know all of the information. And it's okay to admit that you're worried and concerned about your family. It's not an excuse, but if somebody comes and asks you a question, then you say, listen, I don't know what that is right now, but I'll get back to you. And we'll explore that in a minute. As leaders, we need to push information. So if you have volunteers in your organization, I would highly recommend that you start putting together, curating lists of safe and secure information, not Gwyneth Paltrow, Canada Health Agency, organizations like Emergency Management Ontario or your municipality, or possibly organizations like Red Cross or other health-related organizations that you can provide information. And by providing credible sites and sources, you begin to build trust. Now, the caution or the caveat on this is that you must also explain to people that information changes. I just noticed this morning that the Prime Minister was, during his news briefing, people were starting to come on to him and give him a hard time about why can't he just give a date of when all this is going to end up. Well, there is no date. Like, so by providing a date that this might end, that diminishes your credibility, because everybody knows that no one knows when this is going to end. You need to understand that fear is natural and fear is inevitable. And part of it, of dealing with it, is first off to acknowledge to your volunteers and your coworkers and your employees that it's okay to be a bit worried about this. Trust me, when SARS was happening, we were afraid of it. Nobody knew how it was going to end. Nobody knew where it was going to go. So how do we deal with that? It's like, again, go back to the trust slide where we can provide good information. Be honest, be humble. If you don't deal with fear, what's going to happen is will result in a contagious paralysis where people start just being afraid to do anything. And then your organization will grind to a halt. So identify that this fear, contain it, and overcome fear, and be present. I know right now we can't be present physically, one-on-one or in small teams, but we can be present with people online. And I'll speak to that as we go along. The next step about being a leader for anybody, in particular volunteers, is to be persistent and lean into your people. We need to keep our people informed. So tell them where to go to get information, and where to go to do the work, and how to do what's going to be asked of them, and how to be safe in doing that. This is the core of our job as a leader, and doubly so for our volunteers. Like, what can we ask these people to do, and how can we keep them safe? And never ever BS or lie to your people. In the Army, we is saying that soldiers can smell a lie from a million miles. And if you start BSing people, they will completely disregard everything you have to say about that. So the number one rule about, if someone asks you a question and you're not sure about it, you just say, I don't know. I'm not sure about the answer to this question, but I'll look into it, and I will get back to you with an answer tomorrow at the next call, or I'll phone you with this answer no later than tomorrow. Even if tomorrow comes by and you don't have the answer, close the loop and say, I'm sorry, I couldn't find the information we needed for this particular question today, but give me till tomorrow. I'm working on it, and I'll always loop back. And you should also make sure that not only are you dealing with the one person that asked the question, but make sure everybody else knows that you're working on this, because they will wonder about that question and why they haven't heard about the resolution. So make sure when you're having a team meeting, regardless of Zoom or even through email, just close the loop. I'm still working on this particular piece. Again, if you don't know something, say so. Commit when you get back, you'll get back with an answer, and then get back to them even if you still don't have that answer. We have 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth, and you should listen twice as hard to what's happening in your organization and with your volunteers before you open your mouth. And in this regard, we need to spend a lot more time monitoring conversations, chat boxes, social media, and we're not spying on our people, but we're keeping an eye on what people are concerned about and talking about. For example, if you have a Zoom meeting or a webinar that's starting at 11 o'clock, log in 15 minutes early so you can hear what people are talking about, because they'll start sharing information amongst their peers that might surprise you. And out of that will come information that you need to address, or you may be able to fix. We need to lower our levels of our discussion with employees and volunteers to a conversational conversation. We've all been in that meeting when somebody stands up and starts lecturing us at the beginning of the meeting about everything they think they're so smart about. But you'll tune out people online for sure. So become much more conversational. If somebody says something that's wrong, misinformation, or there's a rumor out there that you hear by this monitoring of the conversation and what you're picking up talking to people, you need to jump on it with both feet and correct it. If somebody says something that's wrong, you say, with all due respect, Peter, I'll say Peter because I used to work with a Peter, and he would hear things, and I said, that's not right, Peter. This is the correct piece. Now you have to be respectful in how you do that so you don't shut them down, but you need to jump on that. And if you hear a rumor, get ahead of it and say, look, I heard this rumor in the coffee room or in the conversation or online, and I just need to address it now that this is the way it's going to work. This is the right answer. And you need to understand what people are looking for. We as human beings are not very good about being open and frank about what we need and want when we're having conversations, especially with supervisors and bosses and organizational hierarchy. But we talk in subtle, veiled ways that when you're listening to these conversations, you need to start picking out what people are looking for. So again, be human. Talk to your team as a team every day. So get your volunteer team on a Zoom call, whether they join or not. So that's not neither here nor there. Make yourself available. You want to check in and out with people, especially if they're a working committee or a working team, either every day or once a week, or the beginning of a work period or a time frame or project time frame. So you check in at the beginning and check out with the end. One piece I would suggest is start breaking up your Zoom conversations by meetings by topic and theme. So if you're talking about engaging your volunteers in an operational issue, then just deal with that one thing and then end the call. Even take a short break for 15 minutes, go for coffee, take a bio break, and then come back and then move on to the next topic or the next theme. And again, I can't say this enough. Make sure you're always looking for what your people need. Questions like, that's a great point that you're bringing up around this project we're working on. What do you need to be successful? That's a lot better question than saying, hey, whatever you need, just come and see me, because they will never come to see you. So if you leave open-ended questions that allow you to, allow your people to come to you, and make sure you leave a space in the conversation so they can actually say something. Because if you ask somebody what they need to be successful, and then you jump right on the in with thanks for your last, I hear nothing, so we're moving on. Leave some space. The analogy I would use is like when you cross the border and a border officer says to you, what was the purpose of your visit to the United States or wherever you came back from? They go silent, right? You hear nothing, but they'll just look at you and not say anything. And the human brain goes, oh my gosh, I got to fill this up with chatter. And then you start talking about all of the illegal things you did while you're away. But so buy yourself some space, use silence as a tool when you're having these conversations. We need to be exceedingly creative in our conversations with people. And this is probably the point I think that I would like you as volunteer leaders or leaders of voluntary organizations to really put some thought to and put some heart behind. So in our creativity, we need to start talking about communications. So first off, Murphy's Law says if something's bound to go wrong, it will go wrong every time. And as leaders, we need to be calm and empathetic, and we need to care about what's going on so people start coming to us. We need to manage expectations. We don't want to keep any secrets. And even if we are scared, if we can say we're worried about something, say we're concerned about something, or if we're angry about something, our job is not to lose our temper. And if anybody out there knows me well enough, that's a bit of me being the pot calling the kettle black, because I live my emotions on my sleeve, and I have to work hard at this one because I really sometimes want to rant and rave like a lunatic. So I know it's a challenge because I live that challenge, but we have to control our emotions. So the creative side of what we're doing, we have to start thinking about coming out of the other side of COVID. And I have to tell you right now that no one will be the same. None of us will be the same people. Our organizations will not be the same as what they were going in. In fact, we just were chatting before the webinar started, is like, what will things look like when we come out the other end of this? Do we need buildings anymore? Do we need things that used to be sacrosanct in how we did our business? So now is the time for us to double down on development. We need to start positioning ourselves for the outcome of when we come out of COVID. So how do we engage our volunteers and our organizations in a way that we can develop them for whatever this new future normal is going to look like? And I have to advise everybody on the call that you have no idea how powerful, how intelligent, how thoughtful people are on your teams until you bump into a disaster or a crisis like this. I've seen it time in, time out, when a volunteer or a corporal or a janitor or somebody will come up with this idea that me, as the big, smart, thoughtful, genius executive guy, would never even consider. I shared a story last week on a different webinar about a time during the ice storm in Ontario in '98, when it was one of my last Army operations, and we were worried about generators, and this corporal come up, and there was like a captain and a couple majors, and I was a sergeant major, and like all of the brains of the organization, allegedly brains of the organization, were standing around trying to problem solve this. And this young guy, he was probably about 20, showed up, and he goes, Sergeant Major, can I talk to you? And it was like, get away from, we're working, we're thinking big Army thoughts here, leave this alone. And he was pretty insistent that he needed a moment to chat, so I stepped aside with him, and he said, Sergeant Major, I grew up on a farm, and we had a small welding business, and down in the municipal yard, there's about 4 arc welders on trailers there. And quite frankly, he said, they're nothing but a big generator. And the room went completely silent, but this young guy came up with this brilliant thought that we were struggling with. So by allowing people to develop themselves, to be able to listen, to solve your problems. So the point being is, like, share what's going on. This is a exceedingly human side of what you're doing. If you share the problems, not in a whiny, cryy little way, but if you're saying, geez, I don't know what our organization is going to look like in September, October, or 2021, start sharing it out there. Bring people together and start talking about it. Like, start brainstorming a little bit. These people, your volunteers, have capacity that you have no idea. I recall in Red Cross, some of our volunteers were like ran big organizations. One was an executive with, at the time, I can't remember the name of the company, but it was like MTS Bell internet systems. Well, I can't, she did strategic thinking for Bell Canada, for Christ's sake. So why can't we bring them in there? And I have to advise you all too, as leaders, that only the healthiest organizations will survive to the point where they begin to thrive in the new setting. So how do we double down on development of our organization and development of our volunteer corps and the staff supporting corps in a way that we will be a healthy organization that will not muddle through and stumble through, but walk through this and thoughtful, purposeful actions and survive and then thrive in the future. So when you're talking to people, be human, but don't be stupid. So if it's funny, don't be a comedian. Everybody thinks they're the funniest person on the planet until they get on a stage and say it out loud, and everyone looks at you like you're an idiot. Don't be a comedian. If you're communicating with people via social media and whatever else you're doing out there, know your audience and understand that the internet never forgets. And in this day and age, everybody's got a camera. So if something stupid happens, trust that it will be out there. Know your audience, know your volunteers, understand what they're going through at home. Right now, we all understand that a lot of families are at home with 2 or 3 or 4 kids trying to do homeschooling, plus mom and dad trying to work from home with limited bandwidth of internet access and maybe a limited number of devices that they can work. And if you're starting to put demands on your volunteers that create a conflict between their family and their health and safety at home, then you will lose them.
Understand that no one wants you to fail. And you need to understand that even if a volunteer is not doing things exactly the way you would do them, they're doing a good job. So get off your old school management tools that maybe some of you or some of us have relied on in the past, and let people work. Trust them that they will do what's best for whatever it is you've asked them for, and make sure you're open for them to coming back to find for support and what they need. Always, as an organization, as a human being, understand what your true values are as a leader, as a human being, as an organization, and make sure that those are your touch points, your North Star as you go through these things, especially with COVID. We need to fall back on values more than ever, and be transparent. Understand that people trust, first off, understand, like I said earlier, that people can smell a lie a million miles away. It does us no good to hide behind closed doors or transparent, a veil of secrecy. Share as much information as you can with all of your people, and then open the conversation for them to be able to talk with you. If you are ever dealing with media, I know right now they're focused on maybe bigger things. In smaller markets, generally, there's some media there that are dying for stories. So understand that with your volunteers and the work that you're doing right now, especially as it goes forward, people are going to start looking for a story about something that has gone wrong or sideways, and the media will report on this whether they get a hold of you or not. So make them your friends and feed them information. If you need something, let the media help you do your job. Use social media to stay ahead of this, and by that, what I would suggest is you unshackle your people. Let your people feel free to tweet what you're working on. The general rule is that your staff and volunteers should be able to share on social media the work they're doing and the impact it's having, but not share about policy. So why are choices being made? That can be referred to a supervisor or a leader. The last thing about all of this is there will always be somebody who doesn't like you out there. So don't worry about those people. Ignore that trolls and the person chirping away on Twitter that your organization doesn't know anything and is doing a crappy job, because 99% of people, 99.999% of the people think that you're doing. I recall during, after the tsunami with Red Cross, there was an incident in Indonesia around temporary construction workers and projects that were being done. And it got out in the news that it was bad for sure. It wasn't necessarily Red Cross, but Red Cross had hired some contractors and they weren't treating people very well. Got out in the news, and the night it was going to be on the news, I phoned some of our key stakeholders and I said, hey, just so you know, this is going to be in the news tonight. To a person, they said, that's a really hard place to work, and I appreciate you giving us a call. I'm surprised nothing else bad had happened there. So we are so engaged in our organization. We believe in our organization. We got so much emotional baggage tied up in our organization that we think everybody out there is going to think it's a horrible organization if a little bit of bad news gets out. And most people, quite frankly, don't care. The other side story to this is we used to get some nasty phone calls about people when they heard something in the news about the work we were doing, would say, well, they'd phone up and yell at some poor receptionist or call center person and say, well, you guys are the worst thing on the planet, and I'm never going to give you money ever again. And if we had a name or a phone number or contact, we would look into it, and almost always, they never gave to us before. But yet they got us, the whole organization, all wrapped up around the axles about what they thought. Know that somebody won't like you out there, and live with it, but focus on the good stuff. Focus on your good people. As we come down to the closing of the presentation portion of the webinar, I want to leave you with a couple of things. One is the Chinese use two brush strokes to write the word crisis. One stroke is for danger, and the other is for opportunity. When we're in a crisis, we need to be aware of danger, but we need to recognize the opportunity, because none of us will get out of this whole COVID pandemic thing as we once were. And we want to be stronger. We want to thrive, and we want to survive. As we close out, to all of my new friends in the organization here, I want to say these are all freebies and you're welcome to it. I'm happy to give your team a 1-hour Zoom exercise around building team cohesiveness. I'm happy to help you develop a team rallying cry. What is your mission as you go through this? And it should be something grand, like we want to be bigger, better, faster at the end of this. And if you ever just need an ear for coaching or problem solving, I'm the second easiest guy in Canada to get a hold of, and you can just reach out to me. And these are my links, my website and my email are there. And if you go to the website, my phone number is there. And also on my website, I'd like to offer all of you a free PDF copy of my book, not a copy of my book that you can download at that website. So I think, Kimberly, I think we're done this part of it, and if we want to open it up for questions, I'm super cool to do that. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Actually, I was going to ask you if you could keep sharing, if you could leave your last slide up with your contact information.
Oh, for sure.
Then people can support that. And while you're doing that, just some really great takeaways. I'm just going to run a quick poll of everyone who's here. Hello.
Hi.
I think we should do a quick poll just to see how many people have a volunteer program that's still operating. So if everyone could just answer yes or no, if your volunteer program is currently active, that would be great. And while they're doing that, I just want to summarize some of the great takeaways that I took from your session. The key one that stands out to me is, leaning into your people. I think that's critical. I think, we all are in the industry that we're in because we care about people. And so I think it's just so important to remember to lean into them at this time, because they will need our support undoubtedly. And then I also love separating meetings by topic and team. Oh my goodness, that is fantastic. Just because I find with my team, we are meeting more often now, and sometimes the meetings are they go a little all over the place, and it would be nice to just have it by who needs to be there and why are they there, and do we have an actual, agenda. And then also sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we've all been in that meeting, live meeting, when the person, so I got one more thing to cover, and it's already been an 8-hour meeting, and you just want to bang your head off the table. So it's even worse when it's right.
Especially when people are at home with, kids that are at home, or spouses that are at home, or, we've just changed how we're doing what we're doing. So if we're asking for people's time to, get onto a call, we kind of want to structure that and make it as meaningful as possible. Yeah. And the final takeaway I took that was awesome was just doubling down on development. I don't know about everyone else, but I know for me right now, while I'm being a little bit more still and switching gears, all sorts of ideas are bubbling to the surface. I'm not sure how many of them will be feasible, but there's definitely an opportunity to be really creative right now to figure out how can we do things differently than how we've done it in the past. So yeah. I think that's one of the great things that can come out of all of this.
Yeah.
So thank you for all of that, Steve. Just excellent content. Helpful. I'll close the poll right now. 85% of you have voted. Last 5 seconds for everyone else to get their votes in if they want to be counted. All right, so we'll close that and I will share the results. So we have 29% who are still currently running programs and 71% that are not. So we definitely have some people who are still actively engaged with their volunteers. So I have a quick question for those who are not managing their volunteers. So let's just say, like for me, my core volunteers are all safely tucked away at home. We can't run programming right now. How do we stay engaged with those volunteers? Because we don't have programming running. So what are some ways as a leader can we stay in touch with them?
Well, again, I go back over some of the things we talked of. I would strongly suggest is provide them information, like if it's things like curate a list of websites where they can get good, reliable information around protecting themselves and their family. Become that source of trust. I would also start reaching out to smaller groups. Not, you don't want to make it too big, maybe, but maybe now's the time for them to start doubling down on development and start thinking, well, how can we deliver this? Is there ways we can deliver this program differently in the future? And maybe we can deliver the program in an original and thoughtful way right now. So she's out of the house, so she won't hear me say this, but my wife runs a family resource center, and they've been shut down, obviously, due to COVID. But what they're starting to do is pulling their volunteers together. First off, it was like, well, what are we going to do, and how are we going to function? And we're used to this. And I said, well, bring your volunteers together and your staff together and let them solve the problem. How can they reach out? Is it direct phone calls? I know if you're dealing with people generally in poverty, interconnectivity, especially with the internet, is hard because money is finite. And so, but maybe it's time to start reaching out and phone your client base and say, hey, how are you? Even just how's things going? But engage your volunteers, because I have a sense that as things move forward, and we've all been there. I've been a volunteer for an organization in normal times when nobody could phone me from week to week, to month, and eventually I just wandered off and found something else to do. So I think it's important for us to keep in touch with our people, even if it's gentle things like, here's some information I saw. You want to reach out and talk to our clients, like things like that, to keep people that you show you care. Even bring them together for a happy hour Zoom meeting where everybody grabs a glass of wine or a cup of tea or whatever it is you want to drink, and we just have a couple laughs and giggles about what's your latest Netflix horror story, or what did your husband or wife or kids do during a Zoom meeting, that everyone can have a laugh and stay connected. This is that doubling down. This is that piece about being exceedingly human. Like, we have to work hard at being a human being in these times of stress and disconnection.
Excellent. I have another question here for you. One of the things that, as much as we are connecting, virtually and whatnot, I know a lot of people are feeling sort of disconnected from their community partners and other organizations that they work with. What are some of the concerns, because you've met with a number of groups over the past few weeks, what are some of the concerns that you have seen other organizations are working through right now?
Well, I think it's the same. It's sort of what we just talked about too. First off, I think people are scared that they don't have a purpose in this whole COVID thing. And as an organization, we hang our hat on our mission and vision quite a bit. Like, that's sort of our core. So what people are starting, what I think people should be starting to do is like reach out to stakeholders and just even open the lines of communication, especially your funders. I think your funders are eventually somebody's going to go, holy shit, we've been paying these guys. And they're not doing anything except sitting around watching Netflix and eating potato chips all day, which is not true, but that's the perception that people. So I think it's important for us to reach out to stakeholders and start those same conversations that we might have had with our volunteers. And I would say, like, the kind of that conversation that I mentioned earlier about now is not the time to start building trust, but if you don't have that cachet of relationship, now is the time to start building trust. So go forward with what can I help you with, partner, stakeholder, Mr. Funder, Mrs. Municipality. Where are you struggling that our organization can help? And it's like we've all been there, right? Most of you are either in a relationship or been married, or I've been in lots of relationships. I'm not very good at them. And it's like when you ask somebody how they're doing and they say fine. The question should be, what is it I can help you with? What's going on that you need some support with? And then start that gentle conversation about getting to bringing what value can you bring to them.
Excellent. To those who are still operating programs, we had 29% that are still engaged with their programs. We'd love to know if you could put it in the chat box. Where are you working? Like, what programs are still operating right now? That would be really great to know. And please, again, everyone, please ask your questions in the chat box or let us know what you want to know from Steve. While we're waiting for those questions to pop up, I just want to take a quick second to, again, thank you, Steve, for being with us today and volunteering your time to be with us. Also, I want to give a quick note to everyone who's attended today, and also to the Professional Development Committee, the webinar committee, who's helped make today possible. I want to shout out to Alex, who's done an amazing job at leading PAVRO during this time of crisis. I also want to shout out to Joanne, who, without her, none of this would be possible. She has set up everything behind the scenes. Hopefully, all of you know Joanne by name, if not through email or whatnot, but she's wonderful and she's very resourceful, and she's been pivotal in making today happen. So thank you all to everyone who made today possible. And we all did it remotely from Calgary all the way through to Ontario and to the East Coast. So thank you so much. All right. Any final questions that we have? Steve, do you have any final words of advice, wisdom, like coming out of SARS, and you saw that we didn't know where it was going, how it was going to end. How you see it, any advice on how we can approach COVID the same sort of way?
Yeah, so this would be the advice I give to anybody, whether you're a family or an organization or you're leading a team of volunteers. I think what we have to start to do right now, we're very reactive, right? And that's natural. This thing is in our face, relatively short period of time that it blew up, and in the last few weeks, you know, we've seen the impact of this, like, and worse in other parts of the world. And we've been lucky so far in Canada, but it could happen here where we have deaths and stuff. So I would strongly suggest that as leaders, and again, this is a time to engage your high performing volunteers and high potential volunteers, is first off, what are you going to do if something tragic happens within your organization? That should not be a reactive thing. That should be a thoughtful thing. So start thinking about that. And then start pulling people together who can look into the future. When I say that, not as a clairvoyant, but as how do we think strategically for the future, for the success of our company and our organization and our people? The human brain cannot function tactically and strategically at the same time. So if we're always dealing with the day-to-day stuff and the tactical part and the operational part of our business and our organization, we will never get to the point where we can start thinking about the future. So buy yourself some space, surround yourself with as good a people as you can find. And again, you have no idea how smart your volunteers are until you engage them this way. And start thinking about, what is our organization going to look like, and how are we going to do our work 6 months from now, 1 year from now, so that you can succeed. Because quite frankly, I'm not necessarily a pessimist, but I'm a realist. And I think a lot of organizations will fail in the next 6-8 months. So if you can't figure out what your value is and what your purpose is and what you're going to look like and how you're going to do that, and as time goes forward, I think people are going to be in a lot of trouble.
Can you, from your experience, again, working through SARS, can you give us an example of an organization that came out better for the experience, like where they learned how to do, where they were agile and could adapt, versus that didn't?
I'm just trying to think, like, I can use lots of Red Cross examples. I think for sure Red Cross, I know that it moved us forward faster. As I mentioned earlier, we were transitioning. I was relatively new within a year or two with the organization, and part of my job was to transition the organization to the disaster management component of the organization to more of a volunteer leadership and volunteer delivery as opposed to staff. We took advantage of the SARS response because we had no choice. We had to let volunteers go. In fact, at one point in time, one of the a volunteer who was the operations director, had more spending authority than almost any other staff person in the organization and could commit the organization. So we had to unleash and unshackle the volunteers to go do their work. Other organizations I saw, St. John Ambulance, I think, stepped up, and they really created value with their organization at the time, in how to deliver or how to be a partner organization with. They did a lot of first aid, ambulance transfer, patient transfer, and the screening at the hospitals, and they just stepped up. And again, I think in those circumstances, when the pressure's on and the heat's on, you need to be able to free people. But when at the end of that, then you can't you can't close everybody back up. So as organizations, the St. John Ambulance was a great one, a great example. Others, lots of organizations. I remember Boy Scouts and the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides in York region developed this complete capacity to do stuff that was unbelievable. So, and then they kept moving forward as a much stronger, agile, better organization at the end of that. So I think that's probably what I would say. I could go on for more on that, but I think that as to our audience today, you know, this is part of thinking forward and what are you going to look like, because you can't, if you let people do this fancy, cool, exciting work now, you'll never shut them down or bring them back into the old way of doing business in the future, because they'll just go away.
Excellent. We have a few questions that have come up. So let's see. Zoom meetings, how to handle those. I think you touched on it a bit when you talked about having the meeting separated by teams and by topic. Then we also have a question around virtual tutoring. I don't know what that question is. Let's see. Okay. All right. Just reading through the questions.
Sure. Yeah. If I may, I was just on the Zoom question. There's lots of stuff out there that you can Google and find. But if you're worried about, just start using it. Like, try the very best practices around meetings that you've seen at work and in a face-to-face meeting, and apply that to Zoom. So the one suggestion I would make, beyond the pick a topic, shorter video meetings focus on the tight topic or tight theme, but make sure you if you're chairing it, make sure you go around the room and ask people. Start at the lowest ranking person, you know, and start there and say, what do you think? If you start at especially if you've got, I'm sure nobody out on that call today has a loudmouth volunteer. But if you happen to have one, make sure that you don't let that person take over the whole conversation. Start with the quiet people and get them to talk first, and then make sure everybody has a fair chance to speak. But you need to actively manage the meeting so that everyone feels heard and engaged.
Excellent. We have a question. Steve, what is one thing you did in your interactions with volunteers in each of your disasters? So I guess every disaster has its own sort of requirements and needs. Was there anything unique that you did in each situation that you were in that kind of spoke to the needs of your volunteers?
Yeah, two things. One is I treated them like employees. Yes, we Kimberly and Alex and I, we never had this conversation. I don't like the word volunteer resource management. I believe in human resource management, paid and unpaid. And if you're leading your volunteers differently than you're leading your staff, then you've got a problem. That's my bias. That said, so number one is, you know, I made sure that people knew what I expected of them. I put them in charge. I gave them, more importantly than telling them what I wanted done, I made sure they knew what they weren't allowed to do. So what are your parameters and what is the goal we want to achieve to this? I supervise them like I would any employee, paid employee. And the other part, it was even we used to do a lot of work, like even some of these big fires in Alberta and the last big events in Alberta, and we're, like my volunteer team and my staff team were skittered all over Hell's Half Acre. But I made a point of phoning people and talking to them every day, especially the leaders. So it's in those disasters, I created my expectations were, this is what we want to achieve, this is what you're not allowed to do, and then I touched base with people by phone every day as best as I could at any rate, and made sure that they knew that there was this line of communication. If you give, no matter who it is, paid or unpaid, if you give somebody a task and you don't follow up with them for weeks and weeks and weeks, it's going to go wrong. So you know, trust people. So on that point, I would say that nobody wakes up in the morning, goes to work as a staff, paid staff, or as a unpaid volunteer in a role, deciding that they're going to come into work today and do a crappy job. Everybody wants to do good work and be valued. So trust that, and then trust your people that they will do a good job. They might not do it exactly the way you would do it, but they're going to do a good job, and that's fine. Call it a day.
And that leads me to a question that we had in our previous conversation. I was in another webinar that you did last week, was where, you know, we have our volunteers who have big hearts and really want to help everyone, you know, but what if we have a volunteer that crosses the line a little bit in terms of just over helping, you know, and is kind of going outside the lines of the mandate of the organization? I thought you gave a great answer to that. If you could share your insight with that.
This is the problem with when I give great insights, I'm trying to remember what it was.
So I believe it was around like the performance, performance issues that may be happening right now in a sensitive time.
So I think we have to be cautious, especially when the heat is on and it's a crisis right now. We need to be cautious not to demoralize and diminish people. So if it's not like a life and death or a critical thing that's happened, I would probably set it aside and go back when things are cool and say, hey, you know what? This went sideways here, and this is what I think about that. I'll talk to you about how to address it here in a sec. If it's critical and it's dangerous or high risk to the organization, then I think you need to be able to talk to people. So number one, first off, I've mentioned a couple of times, create expectations. This is what we can do. This is the limit of what we can provide. And if you want to do something different, you need to come back to me as a supervisor and we'll have a conversation. So if it's clear to people what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it, and then again, what they're not allowed to do, like spend money or commit things that can't, then you've created this expectation. So if that's clear to everybody, and I would also, I would have a conversation with the volunteer or the employee. I would have a conversation about that, make sure they're clear. I would follow up with an email saying, hey, Mary, thanks very much for the great conversation. This is what we discussed. This is what we agreed to. I hope you're cool with it. Then if something goes sideways, this is what the approach I would take and recommend is you go to the person, you say, I won't use the same example. I can remember the example now, Kimberly. I won't embarrass you, but I had some fun with Kimberly last week about it. But it's like, okay, so if you're having a Zoom meeting, everybody knows you're supposed to be on the Zoom meeting at 11 o'clock. Then I would go to the person and say, Mary, you understand that we have a daily Zoom call at 11 o'clock and everyone's expected to be on the call at 11 o'clock. That's a fact. There's no two ways about it. And the person has to say, oh yeah, no, I know that. Because unless for some reason they didn't legitimately know. And then you say, okay, Mary, you've been late to the Zoom meetings 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row. That's a fact. Like, you don't say that it's a fact, but what you're doing, you're establishing a series of facts that the person has to agree that this is, I was late. Yeah, you're right, I was late. And then you talk about feelings now. So now you say, do you understand how that makes people feel when you're always late? Like we're on time, everyone gets frustrated, and the person has to understand that, yeah, okay, yeah, that's true.
I can see how that could happen, right? And then you address the future. So how can we address this in the future? In the feelings conversation too, you can start drawing out, why is that person late? Well, maybe they're working from home and their husband works for a company or whatever, or their kids are at school and he or she just can't get on the phone at 11 o'clock. Fair enough. Maybe we can adjust it. So then the future is, what can we do to address this so it doesn't happen again? So as human beings, when we bump into things we don't like, we hit feelings first, right? Boom. Oh my God, that upset me and you were late and you don't care, blah, 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 blah. But if you start with the facts, it frames the whole conversation quite differently, right? Even for you as a supervisor, you're responding to facts now, not about your own emotion. You're dealing with facts. And then you talk about the emotion and the feelings of what it is based on the facts. And then you set up a conversation about how to address it in the future. And once you've had that conversation, once again, I would send an email out or put it in writing and send an email to the person saying, Mary, thanks very much for that great conversation about you being missing or being late to the Zoom meetings over the last 3 days. I really appreciate the circumstances you're going through at home. And this is how we're going to address it for the future. So the 3 F's: facts, feelings, future, and away you go.
Awesome. This has been great. Would you believe that it's been an hour already? It's 2 o'clock. So we have maxed out on our time that we requested everyone to attend. Do you mind staying on the line for like maybe 1 or 2 more questions, Steve?
Absolutely.
Yeah. To anybody who has to leave, thank you so much for attending. If you have to go, we want to respect your time. We just have a couple more questions that we can sort of go through for those who can stick around. We have Charlene who has a question around, she's receiving calls from people who want to sew. So should she allow them to sew masks? Is that an effective way, I guess, to help manage the COVID crisis, which I guess is more of a health issue, but for volunteers as well?
So, not knowing what your business is, Charlene, could you quick type in what your business is? But I think as an organization, we have to be thoughtful about what our mission and mandate is and what our objectives are. So if it's something completely out of scope of our organizational mandate, I would probably engage that person, find an organization that they can go to and support that. Like I know here in Calgary, for example, they're opening up a big shelter for homeless people who have been exposed to COVID in the convention center, which there's a whole conversation about dignity and blah, blah, blah. But people want to bring in masks. Well, maybe your organization, it's not the place for your organization, but how can you help that person find some place where they can fulfill their need to help? And so as opposed to changing your organization, I think that's hard.
Right. So if that's something that your organization does already, then, find a way to bring it.
Let's figure it out.
And then I think also there's like a logistics piece as well, because we do need to maintain that social distancing. So while the volunteers may want to sew, how are we going to get these masks to where they need to go? We need to think about those wider pictures as well. So we don't want to be quick to say no, but I think we need to have a plan in place before we can move ahead.
And I might want to sew a mask, but I never sewed anything in my life. So what kind of quality are you going to have? Like, how are you going to make sure? So maybe this is time again for I want to say a little creative thinking. I can't remember, the word escapes me, about how you maybe set up Zoom classes on how to sew these things up or something like that. If that's your core. If it's not your core, I would probably suggest, okay, how can we redirect this person in a nice way, respectfully, to someplace that it can more suits them.
Next question is, do you see the need that some organizations need to go beyond their scope to support upcoming needs with COVID? So I guess the question is, like, as organizations, are we expected, or do you see the need that's going to happen where we have to expand ourselves to be able to address the pandemic? Is now the time to be stretching ourselves to do things differently?
Potentially, but I think you need to be thoughtful about this. This is that conversation I had earlier about
setting space aside for being thoughtful and strategic.
Mhm.
I probably wouldn't be quick to say yes, not knowing your organization, but I probably would be quick to not to say yes to whatever it is, but to be thoughtful. And then maybe this is a time to engage your board and your senior leadership or the senior volunteers about how this could look.
Mhm.
Is there another organization? And maybe it is a fair thing for you to go down to, excuse me, but maybe it's better for you to partner with another organization. So like during SARS, there was a number of smaller, very great, thoughtful, powerful, community-based organizations that didn't have the capacity that Red Cross had, that they worked like with us and under us, and we provided logistic and administrative and financial support for them to do these other things that align better with them. But I would never say no, but I would be really super thoughtful. Even in SARS, what we did was, if we spent a lot of, we partnered quite a bit with the provincial government and a number of municipalities, and this is the standard answer was, yeah, we might consider that. If you're asking us to do X, Y, Z, we might consider that, but give me 48 hours and I'll get back to you with an answer. And then we got back within 24 hours. We almost always said yes, but we bought ourselves some time to think about it a little bit because there was human resources, the volunteer risk to people. There was maybe a financial risk to the organization, a reputational risk to the organization. So we needed time to think about this. And that's why I think it's really super important in these times of upheaval and crisis that you build like a strategic component to your organization to think about these. I'm not sure I answered the question great, but that would be my general advice.
I agree. I think now, as much as we all want to be as helpful as possible, the first thing we can all do to be helpful is to stay home. And we need to fight the urge sometimes to jump in headfirst to sort of redesign what we're doing in order to speak directly to the crisis, because we may not have the capacity to fulfill it all the way to the end. And there's a lot of logistics that can go into doing things differently. I've seen some organizations that are responding really quickly, really agile, like Niagara College. You know, they have their distillery program there. Instead of making, you know, alcohol and spirits, they're making disinfectant. Like, that is quick thinking, and they have the equipment, they have the ability to retool on the fly. But if your organization doesn't have that ability right now, now may not be the best time. So I totally agree with you, Steve, that, you know, we need to think about it thoroughly before we jump in.
Yeah. And I would go back to something I mentioned earlier, like think about what it's going to look like for you in the future instead of kind of getting sidetracked by the shiny thing. Now, like, what is your organization going to look like in 2021?
Right.
That's much more powerful and a worthwhile investment than going, oh, look, we can sew masks. Let's go do that.
Exactly.
With all due respect to mask sewers.
All right, we are at 2:10, and I think that was the final question for today. But anybody who has follow-up questions, feel free to email Steve. Steve, what's your email address again?
Steve, S-T-E-V-E, at Stephen, S-T-E-V-E-N, Armstrong.ca. So Stephen Armstrong is all one word. That domain is also linking to my website. And yeah, I'm super happy to help anybody. The three offers I stand, and also Kimberly, I'll send Kimberly a PDF of the slide deck, version of the slide deck that you can share with everybody that's on the call too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of that. Thank you again for, you know, being here with us today and jumping in, you know, and volunteering to be with us today. Thank everyone who has attended today, those who stuck around, you know, to 10 after 2, we appreciate your time. We're definitely in a really interesting space in the world right now, and we just appreciate everyone's commitment to their professional development. Clearly, you all love your fields, and we appreciate that. And we also appreciate your support of PAVRO. So with that, I will just say take care, everyone. Look forward to future webinar offerings, and stay safe.
Yeah. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much, Kimberly and Alex.
Oh, you're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, I know.
Bye-bye.